The last thing I want to talk about in relationship to genetics and microbiology is something that you're aware of, but you might not have the depth of understanding that you will get after we talk about it. It says, using influenza as an example, explain the difference between antigenic shift and antigenic drift. Remember, antigens are the molecules on the surface of cells that make them unique. Okay, and so when you get a vaccine, remember we said that the spikes on a virus can act as antigens. They are what stimulate your immune system. So if you get a vaccine and then the virus changes its antigens due to mutations, all of a sudden you need a new vaccine. Okay, so we're going to talk about how that happens, why we need these new flu vaccines every year. This is the picture in your book. I kind of like the picture on the next page better, so I'm going to talk this through kind of twice and in order to help you get this concept. So we're trying to distinguish this concept of antigenic shift and antigenic drift. So first we want to look at is, think of the word drift and shift. Which one seems more abrupt? Drift or shift? And I think about a shift as a big change. A drift is kind of a slow, gradual change. And so this happens in viruses, influenza viruses. So what it's showing here, this is the genetic material in this virus. It's RNA. And some of the instructions in this RNA encode how to make the spikes. And you can see that there's these two spikes, neuraminidase and hemagglutinin, but you hear them called N and H. Like when I mentioned the bird flu, H5N1, H is, what kind of H's do they have and what kind of N's do they have? Okay, so you've heard that terminology. What happens is, as the virus copies itself, mutations can happen. Because we said that when you copy DNA or RNA, you can get some natural forming mutations. And so every time that virus multiplies, you have the possibility of a mutation happening. And some mutations might actually change the spikes. So here the hemagglutinin, the H spike, that mutation right there caused it to change. And now this virus is different enough that it still causes the disease, but it's no longer detected by the vaccine that you got, or it's no longer detected by the antibodies that you made in response to being infected by the virus the last time. So this is what's happening all the time as viruses multiply in our bodies. They're genetically drifting. The viruses that are doing this are the influenza viruses that we typically get during flu season. So, flu season, what is it, like October and November till about March or something like that. And so there's a season of the year in the US where we're typically going to get the flu, and we should get our flu vaccines in October before the flu season. And every year we need to get a new flu because this antigenic drift is so predictable that we know in next year the influenza virus is going to be a little bit different. And that's the reason why they have to kind of make a guess as to what change is going to be made and try to figure out what should we make the new flu vaccine look like. In the US, the vaccine we get is something that they figure out by what influenza is in China the previous year. And then that is what's going to typically circulate throughout the world. And we typically get a vaccine against that. And we usually get like 3 different, in one vaccine, you're usually protected against 3 different influenza viruses. So scientists have to kind of make a guess, a good guess. I mean, they've got some experience at this, but they have to kind of guess of what it's going to look like. So this antigenic drift is going on all the time. It's predictable. It happens on a predictable pattern, a predictable period of time. And it's the reason why we get our seasonal flu vaccine. We get a new flu vaccine every year. Antigenic drift is more dramatic. Typically what happens is we have two different influenza viruses. And those two influenza viruses, you can see that they've got different H's and N's, and they're both going to infect the same host. And these viruses are going to mix inside of this host and form a completely new virus. Notice that this with the drift, there's some similarities from the previous virus to the new one. But in this shift, you can change this virus entirely. We have a virus that may never have been made before, may not have been ever occurred before. We can create new viruses this way. So an antigenic shift requires two different viruses that mix into a common host and form potentially a brand new virus. And here's where this picture becomes a little bit helpful. Typically what happens with antigenic shift is we'll have a human virus and a bird virus. Now the bird virus is not typically infective of humans. Now sometimes we can get bird viruses, but it's not common. Not everybody's going to be infected with this. So there's a lot of bird flus and there's a lot of human flus. But pigs actually have an immune system that is similar to humans and in some ways similar to birds. And human flu viruses and bird flu viruses can both multiply in pigs. And so what can happen is we can in a pig body, you can create a brand new virus that nobody has ever seen before. And if you have a bird flu that's very deadly, and a human flu that's not very deadly, but is able to infect humans, you could end up with a deadly flu that can infect humans. And that's where we get so worried about the bird flus, because a lot of those are very highly pathogenic and cause a relatively high rate of death. So we call that antigenic shift. And that's going to be a bigger change. And these viruses can become present at any time. They're not on a regular cycle. In fact, they don't happen regularly. We had one that happened in 2009. We had a one that came out of pigs in Mexico. The scientists were actually able to track exactly the pig farm where it evolved. And these can cause pandemics, worldwide epidemics, because they can be brand new flus that nobody's immune system has ever seen. The seasonal flu is even if even if everybody's not vaccinated, there's always going to be some people that have had this before, this has been around before, and they're going to have some immunity. So it doesn't mean, a lot of people can get sick from these seasonal flus, but in the case of the antigenic shift, this could make an influenza that nobody has ever seen before. So it can spread like crazy. So antigenic drift is a gradual change due to mutations, natural mutations from cells multiplying. It can happen in humans and just involve human flus, and it's a gradual process, and that's where our seasonal flu and our annual vaccines are required. Antigenic shift requires two different hosts, a human and a bird, and those viruses are combined in a pig, and you can get a brand new flu, and these can be a really big deal and cause pandemic flus any time of the year. So there you go, antigenic shift versus antigenic drift.